Hello, everyone. We are back. It's Wondergoal, soccer betting podcast from the Action Network, presented to you by Bet365. My name is Michael Leboff. Joining me for season 3 of our intrepid podcast are my friends and co-host Anthony DeBundo, coming to us from King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. BJ Cunningham, Dubuque, Iowa. I'm Michael Leboff from Long Island, New York. And before I bring in these two gentlemen, just a reminder that Wondergoal is proudly presented by Bet365, the world's favorite sportsbook brand. Sign up with promo code ACTION to get Bet365's exclusive sign-up offer. Bet $1 on any game, get $200 in bonus bets. You must be 21 or older. The offer is available in Colorado, New Jersey, Ohio, Virginia, and Iowa in the United States. If you have a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. Gentlemen, this is our Premier League preview episode. One of our favorite times of year. Our hearts aren't broken. We don't know which teams we will love. We don't know which teams we will hate. That's not true. We know what teams we will love. But it's a new slate, a new board. Let's look at the new board. Wouldn't you know, Man City is an odds-on favorite to win the league. They are minus 138 at Bet365. Then it's Arsenal 5-1, Liverpool 8-1, United 11-1, Chelsea 12-1, Newcastle 14-1, Tottenham 40-1, Brighton, Hove Albion 50-1. Everybody else triple digits or longer. Anthony, you and I are kind of on the same page here with how we'd play this. I do have a bet that I would make. It's more of a for fun long shot, but what are you seeing here in the title race? Any betting value on the board at the moment?
Yeah, so, we tend to overreact to what we just saw, and that has massive implications on the betting market. So let's go back to just last season. Coming into the year, we did this podcast. Tottenham was the third favorite to win the Premier League. Chelsea was the fourth favorite. And the whole idea was, nobody wants Arsenal, nobody wants United. And the season played out in pretty much the complete opposite. Tottenham and Chelsea were an embarrassment for large parts of the season. Arsenal had their big surge before they blew the title. And United took a good step forward under Ten Hag in the first year. And now the market is completely flipped. Nobody wants Tottenham. Nobody wants Chelsea. Everybody's can't wait to line up to bet Arsenal. I know BJ got some 8-1. They're now down to 5-1 in the market. I can't get there on 5-1. Gabriel Jesus goes down with an injury now. Looks like he's going to miss the first month of the season. Arsenal is a really great, I think they've had a great summer. I think the three biggest concerns with Arsenal were, striker, which now is a concern again, central midfield depth and age, which they got Declan Rice, and defensive back depth, center back depth, and they got Jurriën Timber. So there's a lot of reasons to be excited if you're an Arsenal fan, and I get why BJ is so excited to bet the Gunners, but I just don't really think the numbers there. I mean, do they really win the league here more than 20% of the time, 15, 16, 17% of the time? I don't think so. Not against City. The thing about City is, on one hand, there is the whole regression, exhaustion angle where they don't have as much depth, and they just had the ultimate peak in soccer with the treble. And now they might struggle, and the motivation could drop. But it's also the first time they've had a real off season since before COVID. City for the first time comes into a season with a pretty settled squad where there aren't pieces coming and going and a lot of news. They're going to get Guardiola in and whatnot, and probably one or two more players before the end of it all. There's really no holes in the City team either, unless Walker leaves. So I really think that I'm hoping City starts slow again. I don't think they're going to, because the schedule is very friendly to begin, and hope to get in on City at a better price. But ultimately, I think there's just too many question marks about Liverpool, who is the only team that I think has that ceiling still to match City if City's at its best. I think Arsenal can match City if City's a little worse. If City does really come down, I think Arsenal's floor is very high now. But I think Liverpool, with their attacking firepower, is the only team with the ceiling to go toe to toe with City. And given their defensive issues that I don't really know that they've fixed, I'm still kind of holding here.
I want to build up that because I actually think you should expect City to come back down a little bit. And it's not just about the motivation, because I mean, we see like Bayern has won 10 Bundesligas in a row. Like teams are going to be motivated to win the title no matter what happened the season before. I don't really buy too much into that, but what I do think is the league is better. Like we're now talking, the big six isn't a thing anymore. There's now 8 really, really, really good teams in the Premier League. Like 8 of the best teams in Europe are in the Premier League when we now add Newcastle and Brighton to the big six. So right away, that just makes the chasing pack deeper. And it means that these teams are all going to kind of beat up on each other. So I think that the point total that you need to win the league is going to come down. I think it's going to turn into more of a Kentucky Derby style title race where it's, the field is much wider than a normal horse race. And it's just going to be a war of attrition. And that's why I actually don't hate a bet on Spurs at all. They're 44-1. It's high. That's the highest number I've seen out there. I actually think they have a high ceiling because I really like Ange Postecoglou. I'll figure out how to pronounce his Greek name at some point throughout this podcast. But he's the type of guy that seems to just invigorate a squad when he comes in. This is a team that's needed that's been crying out for that for a long time. You know that they have the attacking firepower to score. They get the fullbacks that they needed. The midfield's good. I mean, I don't think that this is too different from, what we saw at Arsenal last year, which is, a team from this range that just needs things to break right for it to put some pressure on City. That's the only title bet that I would go close to. Because like you said, the number is just not even close on Arsenal or Liverpool or United. Like Chelsea, I think like if Chelsea was 30-1, then we can have an interesting conversation. But
I agree.
They're not. Like this is these numbers are outrageous, and the league is so top heavy that you understand why. I mean, Brighton 50-1 is insane. That's insane. Like we love Brighton, but they shouldn't be 50-1 to win the league.
I think there's like a 20-1 out there, which is Brighton winner without Man City. Which I am tempted by. I actually think you're kind of right about the whole point about it kind of being a very wide field, because the top 8 has gotten so strong relative to Europe, relative to each other. And I really think there's not a team in the top 8 where I feel like they had a bad summer, or like where I feel like they're moving in the wrong direction. Not one team except maybe City, but City starts from such a high perch to the point where I kind of think that like 2 to 7 or 8 might be really, really tight. And City could get dragged into it for sure. But
especially if they start slow, which
as we get more into the bets on like what else we're betting, top 4, top 6 and stuff, you'll kind of see a theme where I think that like 2 to 4 are getting a lot of market respect. And I'm not sure there's a huge gap between, a Liverpool, United, and a Newcastle versus like a Tottenham and a Chelsea, right, or Brighton trying to make that move up the table or stay up there from last season. So yeah, I tend to think that this is going to be an extremely fun season for the top, and that we have, BJ and I were talking, 2 blobs. We have the top blob, and then we have the bottom blob. Whereas last year it felt, even the year before, like 4 tiers maybe. This year it really feels like there's like 2 tiers, and then everybody in the middle, like 2 teams in the middle.
And BJ, we'll bring you in 1 second because we know where this conversation goes once we do bring you in. But the one other thing I want to point out is like this in a league like the Premier League, where it's just an absolute soap opera. Last year when we did our season preview, if I told you that not only was Graham Potter gonna leave Brighton, manage Chelsea, and then be fired from Chelsea just to be replaced by Frank Lampard, who was just previously fired by Everton, like you guys would have called me crazy. But the point is that there's no reason to bet these shorter numbers, in my mind at least, when you're walking into a league that stuff like that. Roy Hodgson is managing Crystal Palace, right? Like weird things are going to happen between this moment and when we wrap up the season in May. Who knows who's going to still be standing? And I just think in that case, like it just makes a lot more sense when it is going to be a wide field. These horses are all going to be bumping into each other all season long. They're going to be beating one another all season long. That's going to bring down the ceiling that you need to win the league. And it should keep, I think, all 8 of these teams, maybe 1 or 2 has a Chelsea type season from last year that things just don't click at all. But 6 of the 8, let's say, they're just going to be in it. So why not take the longest number? I think got a team with a high ceiling, with a new manager who I think really can just stoke a fire under a team. I think that's maybe his best asset. So yeah, I'm going to be playing Spurs. I think that this team, especially, I think they'll hold on to Kane, and even if they don't, Richarlison's better than him anyway. So like, I'm not too fussed. So yeah, I'm continuing to talk myself into Tottenham Hotspur as a little sprinkle at 44-1, just to give me one team going into the season. All right, BJ, welcome back.
Hi, Michael. I mean, I'm ready for this Premier League season. I mean, I'm so excited about my Gunners because for the first time as a fan, I truly feel confident in their abilities to challenge for the title. Now, you just mentioned the rest of the teams that are kind of vying for the title right now. Well, in my mind, Tottenham and Chelsea are going through transitional periods with different managers, different philosophies, and it's going to take some time for those to. So I think they obviously don't have Europe to deal with. So, you have that aspect of, putting everything into the Premier League. But again, a team like Chelsea the roster overhaul here with Chelsea is just so massive, and you're changing systems. We'll get to them in a little bit. Same thing with Tottenham, who I agree with you guys is a team that I'm looking to buy, changing a system that might the Premier League. But for Arsenal, it really comes down to them, what they did in the transfer market to make sure that they got to the level of what Manchester City is. So if we go back to last season, what happened to Arsenal that caused them to essentially derail their title hopes? Well, it was injuries. For the last 11 matches,
they couldn't defend.
They couldn't defend. Right, exactly. William Saliba got hurt, and it just totally messed up everything Arsenal was doing. Over those last 11 matches, Arsenal conceded 1.45 expected goals per 90 minutes. That's really, really bad. That's like close to Liverpool numbers. But with Saliba, the first 27 matches, they only conceded 0.97 expected goals per 90 minutes. So
those are Yuri Mina type splits.
Exactly. Those definitely are, Michael. So that's what we have here now with Arsenal is that, Saliba's obviously healthy, but what did Arsenal also was working against Arsenal is their most versatile defender, Tomiyasu, was also hurt for the rest of the season. So they had to play Rob Holding, who's not great in build-up play and overall just not really that great of a defender. And it totally derailed everything Arsenal was trying to do. So what does Mikel Arteta do? He goes out and gets Jurrien Timber, who is another very versatile center back who can play right center back, right back, even into the midfield, and gives Arsenal a ton of depth along that back line. And he can also invert into the middle of the pitch. So now you have him and Zinchenko. Like, good luck trying to plan for what Arsenal is going to do and what Mikel Arteta is going to do. And Declan Rice is obviously just the perfect signing. Best defensive midfielder in the entire world right now at 24, just reaching his peak. Led the Premier League with 63 interceptions last season, is an unbelievable transition defender. Oh, and also had 240 progressive passes. That was 8th in the Premier League, playing for a West Ham team that held the 3rd most possession in the Premier League. So now you have him. You signed Kai Havertz to basically replace Granit Xhaka, and now you're going to play him alongside Odegaard in a 4-3-3. And Kai Havertz is somebody that I'm very, very interested in this season. He obviously went through a poor finishing run with Chelsea last year, but he's not a true number 9. If you remember when he came over from Bayer Leverkusen, he was playing more as a right wing or a number 10 role, and he was flourishing in that. And then Chelsea, because of their terrible business, basically never actually tried to sign a number 9. So he had to play there, and he went through a bad finishing run, and everybody says he stinks. I don't see that. You also have 2 of the best wingers in the Premier League in Saka and Martinelli, and you just have depth everywhere with Trossard. Even Reece Nelson had a great season last season. He'll be a good backup to Bukayo Saka. And Nikita, Anthony, is just as good as Gabriel Jesus. I don't think there's going to be this massive drop-off just because he's hurt for a few games. I really don't see it. Nikita played very, very well in a fill-in role for that middle period of last season when Gabriel Jesus was hurt. Per transfermarket.com, guys, Arsenal is now the most valuable squad in the entire world at 1.22 billion, just barely surpassing City. Now, I think once Govardal comes over, I think that will City will eventually surpass Arsenal. But Arsenal, what they've done to give themselves tactical flexibility, to give them depth, because they're going to be back in the Champions League, has really elevated them, in my opinion, to the level of Manchester City because of the business that they've done this offseason. So yes, I've grabbed Arsenal already at 8-1. 5-1, I agree, is a little short, but I truly believe they're on that level with City right now. So I still think that's probably the cutoff I would play them at is 5-1, but I truly still believe that price is still a tad high given what Arsenal has now in terms of the talent on their squad, and with Declan Rice just completely changing the fold and allowing Arsenal to have ultimate game control, similar to what Pep has been doing with Manchester City. So Arsenal at 5-1. I love them to win the title. Outside of them, like I agree with you guys. Tottenham at 44-1 is somewhat interesting, and I do like the business that Tottenham has done this offseason, but also transferring from a low block, passive centric team into a team that's now going to build out of the back, high pressing, high energy. That's a massive change to make, and I think you'll see them get better as the season goes along. I think 44-1.
I think that's part of the reason I like it too.
Yeah, I know it's a decent price, but at the same time, it's going to take some time for him to implement a system. So, Arsenal is only the place I'm going. I really truly believe the Gunners can really contend this season for a title.
The one other thing I want to add we're so conditioned to talking about the title race being a City versus Team B.
Mm-hmm.
It was Liverpool for quite a while. Now it's Arsenal right now, but it's not right this season. I just don't view the season as two teams are going to break away from the pack. I think it's going to be impossible especially with the way I expect City to start, which is not too well. And the way you mentioned Tottenham, right? Like the new manager coming in, it'll take some time to adjust. Maybe they don't start rocking and rolling either, but by the time they're on song, like if they can rattle off if they can find their peak by Boxing Day, like they should still be within shouting distance of making a run. Like we saw United kind of flirt with being in the mix last season as well. So I think that recipe works. I just think with the way that this is set up, with it being City of odds on, deserving favorites, everything like that, totally agree with that. But then the next 7 teams, I shouldn't say that. I should say like the next 6 teams, because Brighton, I still think like we love Brighton and they're really, really good. But the next 6 teams below City, I think, are on a lot level playing field over a course of a 38 match season than these odds show. So Anthony Spurs that he hates.
Yeah. I mean, Liverpool, the price isn't there for them, but they're going to be. I think they're the most fascinating team coming into the season by far because of what they've done.
Chelsea.
See, I don't see that. I think Chelsea's going to be continuing to take dip.
So the thing about Chelsea is that they are replacing half of their minutes,
right,
and half of their expected goals output, but they were bad.
Mm-hmm.
So is that good? Isn't that good to get rid of the bad? And then try again with new players. And like Chris Nkunku, Nico Jackson, you could sell me on that being a good group of attackers. Sterling, bounced back season after he was down last year. Actually having a manager, having a team that ran the least in the Prem last year. Now they're going to actually run. Like you could sell me on Chelsea, but the market seems to be still in love with them. I mean, over and over again, the second half of last season, we kept saying it. I said it 1,000 times. Like I lost most of my bets. They can't stay this bad, and look at how much respect they're getting in the market. And we're beating the close every time, and it's not doing much for us because they're creating 2 XG and losing 2-1. But the Blues, this is a team that still, I know a lot of the players have been cleared out. They've lost a lot of their minutes. Like I said, Koulibaly gone, Mendy gone, Pulisic gone, Havertz gone. Like there's been a lot of clearing out, but ultimately I think it's almost good. And they don't have the Europe to deal with now, which should keep a pretty tight and small squad that could maybe figure things out under Pochettino. But I just don't really know that they have that level to get to that I think you're going to need to be at. Like the teams who can get to a level of performance week in and week out could actually win this league. I feel like it's in Liverpool for sure, Arsenal for sure. I actually think Newcastle and Brighton have shown it more than United has, because United never really got there last year. Brighton, for all of its questions about who's going to be playing for them come the end of the month, like they played at the second highest level in the league in the second half of last season. Newcastle's been a steady burn and with improvement. So it's very fascinating. Like I said, I have not bet a title future. If I had to bet anybody and you made me bet someone, I would probably take Liverpool.
That's your team. So makes
Yeah,
sense.
they're my Reds.
All right, let's go to top 4. We can carry this conversation into that market. Just reading off some of the odds here. City is obviously prohibitive price at minus 2,000. Arsenal minus 200. Liverpool minus 188. United minus 138. Chelsea plus 125. Newcastle plus 150. Tottenham plus 333. Brighton plus 550. Villa 8-1. Then we get into some longer shots with West Ham 25-1. Brentford's 40-1. Palace, Wolves, Fulham, Everton 50. Forest 100. Burnley 150-1. Bournemouth 150-1. Sheffield United 250-1. And Luton Town, the Hatters, 500-1.
I'm gonna have to throw a dollar on that.
Before we dive into those, into any bets we have here, I should note that if you are listening to Wondergoal for the first time, welcome, and throw us a download, subscribe, review, all that jazz. Maybe right now, before we get into top 4, where we'll let BJ kick things off. And if this is your first time listening to us over the past 2 years, along with a lot of people who bet a ton of soccer, we fell in love with Brighton. We thought we were a little scared of the love we felt for Brighton when Graham Potter left. And then we fell even more in love with Brighton when Roberto De Zerbi came along. And this is why I'm a little nervous about buying Brighton. I don't know how long he's going to last. Because
he'll be fine.
Let's say that the Bayern sacks a manager, Juve sacks Allegri. Like the first name that's going to pop up for the first big club that sacks a manager is going to be De Zerbi. That's scary.
But here's the deal,
and
Mike.
I know, and this is what we said about Potter. We said they've got a plan in place, and they do have a plan in place. I'm sure they have a plan in place.
You talked me down last year.
Second time is scary.
You talked me down last year, Michael. I said it's
know.
the worst thing ever, and you said, "Don't worry, Brighton's a smart club. They'll find the perfect manager," and they did. So sometimes you just kind of got to believe in the club.
They got better.
They got better.
They did get better.
A lot better.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead, Anthony? Because I know this is one of your futures.
Yeah. Look, I'm betting Brighton top 4, plus 550. The level that they established in the second half of last season for me. You expect natural regression from that number. I don't think that they'll continue putting up 2.1 expected goals per match, which, by the way, was tied with Man City for the best in the Premier League in the second half of the season. They do lose their best player in Alexis McAllister. And their most incredible ball production numbers from him. But I mean, they already have replacements. And Ciso, they just keep finding these South Americans. And Ciso comes in. He was getting 4.3 shots per 90. Showed some real, quality, finishing some bangers from outside the penalty area, but also just putting up some monster shot production. Kaoru Mitoma, one of the best dribblers and ball progressors in the league. Evan Ferguson is the reason to say that Brighton can outrun any possible regression, because he barely played. He only played 10 90s last year, and he had 8 goals and 2 assists, 0.51 XG per 90 at 18 years old. That's 14th best in XG per 90 amongst players with at least 10 90s. So in Ciso, Ferguson, Mitoma, and they may keep Caicedo. I mean, they haven't lost him yet. And I think eventually he'll get sold just because there's a lot of demand for his position, and for his role and his talent, but they're going to get a lot of money. They can reinvest some of it and save some of the rest for, profits. So I think that there's the teams that have given them trouble have been the teams that are able to, force high turnovers and then turn that into immediate goals and attack.
And Sean Dyche is Everton.
Everton did it. Newcastle did it. Man United even effectively did it in the one match that they played where they really stifled them. They couldn't score off of it, but they had a lot of chances. But these teams that want to play low and like sit deep, that used to be the Brighton kryptonite. Remember, they used to create all these chances but couldn't finish. But this is a different crop of players. This is a different manager. It's a much more aggressive system from De Zerbi than Potter ever played. And I think it makes them really good at beating up on the shit teams. Like better than Tottenham's going to be to begin the season, better than Chelsea, maybe better than United. And like I said, I just think that the market is downgrading them, just expecting this regression, banking it back to their transfer value and saying, well, this is still Brighton. We need to regress it back to what their priors are. And I agree with that, but only to a certain extent, because I just think at like a plus 550, they're going to be in the cement mixer with all those other teams. And with Ferguson maybe taking a leap into like star at 19 years old, that's the way where if he bags 20 goals this year, which I think is very possible, they're going to be in the top 5, I think pretty solidly in that mix. So plus 550, Brighton top 4. And then I also like Newcastle, but we'll let BJ talk a little bit and then we can come back to them.
Yeah, I mean, so Newcastle, the best price you can find them out them right now is plus 160 to finish in the top 4. And an exercise I like to do when I'm looking at the futures market is number one, obviously go back and look at a lot of the underlying metrics from the past season. What teams did well. Like Newcastle, I don't think a lot of people realize this, but Newcastle finished with the second best expected goal differential in the Premier League. They were a plus 0.85 XG differential per 90 minutes. That was better than Arsenal, better than Liverpool, better than Manchester United. So now you have to look and you say, okay, Newcastle isn't one of the big 6 clubs. So it's similar to Brighton. You're like, oh, they probably are going to have some natural regression, right? They're going to be playing the Champions League for the first time. I don't really see the natural regression coming from Newcastle because as everybody else, the big 6 obviously spent money in the transfer market. Newcastle spent money and got better. Went out and got Sandro Tonali, who's one of the best young midfielders in the entire world, press resistant, great on the ball, good ball progression, can press with the best of them, which is really what Newcastle did. They showed time and time again against the big boys that they can press them and they can beat them up. And throughout a full 90 minutes, they did it to Arsenal, they did it to Brighton, they did it to Manchester United. The only team they really kind of struggled with was City, and it is what it is. But Newcastle does this thing that makes them so difficult to play against, where because they can beat you up with their man-to-man pressing going forward, that they almost force you to play the ball long. Well, if you're going to play the ball long, then that's going to create a transitional type match. And there's no better team playing in transition in the Premier League than Newcastle was last season. And then you look at also what they did is they went out and got Harvey Barnes, who is, I believe, an upgrade to Alan St-Maximin, who's obviously off to the Saudi League. Alan St-Maximin, while he's a great dribbler and he's a great ball progressor, Harvey Barnes actually adds goal production for Newcastle. If you look at his numbers, he was one of the best in terms of non-penalty expected goals for wingers in the Premier League last season for Leicester. So you add him alongside Alexander Isak, who, like, he's a top 5 striker in the Premier League. Like, he is so good. He's got every finish in his locker. He can play well in the air. He can play well on the ground. It was clear, Callum Wilson had a great season last season. Like, he was a 0.84 XG per 90 minute striker. That was, I believe, second to Holland in terms of XG per 90.
Yep.
But he also, he's getting older and his minutes went down as when Ishak came in. So now you have these two fantastic strikers. You add Harvey Barnes, who is obviously a very talented player out on the left wing. Like, the natural regression here from Newcastle, I don't really see it. I think that they retooled perfectly. They got better. And the market is telling you that, oh, well, they're going to regress. Liverpool's better than them. United's better than them. Arsenal's better than them. Well, Arsenal may be better than them. I don't really see Newcastle being like the 5th or 6th best team in the Premier League. I think they're very much in the conversation of being the 3rd or 4th team. I think they're better than United for sure. So at plus 160, I love the price on them to finish inside, the top 4. I've also played them at minus 120 to finish higher than Chelsea because they basically have the exact same point total as them, which I think is absolutely an insane number. But they have the money, so we're not done with the transfer window yet. They could still bring in, another high price target before the season starts. So I think the price on Newcastle is good enough at plus 160 to finish inside the top 4. They're just every bit as good as United and Liverpool.
They feel safer, which sounds weird to say, than United, Chelsea, Liverpool, or Spurs in that market. Like you can kind of, I feel like of all of the teams in this 8-team cohort, I feel like you can feel the most confident projecting Newcastle's path in this season compared to basically anybody else. Now, like their kind of margins might be, their ceilings, of course, lower than City's, and their floor might be like lower as well, of course. But I feel like the gap between the ceiling and floor is a lot narrower than some of these other teams. One thing I will say about that bet is they have a really rough start to the season. Newcastle, I think it's Villa, then Villa, City, Liverpool, Brighton out of the gates.
Which I'll say this, Michael, because of their, Champions League schedule in the middle of September, that's almost, I think, a good thing for them to really put everything into those first couple of matches against big competition. And then, obviously rotating. It's harder to rotate against teams like Arsenal and City when you're middle playing Champions League. Obviously, it's their first time doing that, so it's going to be new for them. And they need depth to be able to get through this type of gauntlet and playing that many matches. So that's the worry with them, I think, is just the sheer amount of matches and the lack of depth comparatively that they have to a team like a Liverpool, Arsenal, and City. So,
and they can always just buy all the players.
And that's the point. Yeah,
they Saudi Arabia at some point,
right?
If they're really in the title race, like don't be surprised if all of a sudden Cristiano Ronaldo's
Newcastle. Don't be surprised in January if they just drop 120 million on a bunch of players. Like that's also what you have in your pocket.
Al Hilal comes back over.
You have money in your pocket. Like, are we contending for the title? All right, let's just go spend.
Yeah, but my point was that you might be able just to wait a little bit on Newcastle. Their numbers might tick down, both if you're looking to bet a future and to win the title or top 4 with the way they start.
I agree. I think there are some areas where you can say, well, that's probably not going to happen again. So the thing is, the whole defense was healthy all of last year. Nobody ever got hurt. So they were able to start their best defenders every match. But that could possibly be a red flag for them if they're not able to do that again. I'm not as high on Tonali. I do like Barnes. I think Barnes is a good replacement for Saint-Maximin, and Almiron kind of not really getting those minutes. What I really like about Newcastle though, Wilson, when he's on the pitch has always been great, but he's always hurt. Isak is great cover for him, but they can also play them together, which is what I thought was the biggest difference last year. Because the reason we love Isak so much is that not just because he scores goals, but because he's so good in a facilitator role with the ball at his feet, creating for others, that he can play off the left, play off Wilson. And the two of them together was really wrecking teams, especially in transition last year. You talked about it. The other thing for Newcastle, their numbers, are kind of, and this is something the double pivot guys talked about. They played as like a team who, got to take advantage of the fact that there was always space in behind. They got to always be in those transitionary moments because teams didn't treat them like a big side. We're going to sit really deep. And you did kind of see a struggle with that in the middle part of the season when they were drawing with lower table teams a lot, right after World Cup break. But once they get ahead, man, it's so tough to play them. They are so physical. They're number 1 in high turnovers forced last year. Number 1 in aerial duel percentage won by over 2.5% to the next best team. They are mean. They are physical. They get in your face, and they aren't afraid to press and bully you. So it's a tough matchup for anybody. And Tonali is good depth. I think if anything, I don't know that he starts every week or is a huge great player for them, but they're going to need more bodies in here. So I want to see 1 or 2 more moves, even if they're just small consolidation type moves. But yeah, I don't really see this Newcastle step back. I think if anything, it's kind of just a repeat of last year. But if they just do what they did last year, that's going to put them right there with those other teams. So yeah, plus 160 Newcastle, top 4. I like Newcastle. I like Brighton. We're kind of buying high on Newcastle a little bit, but again, this market love for United. United's a really tough team to kind of figure out because it kind of depends on your opinion of Rasmus Hojlund, but it's certainly interesting.
Let's talk top 6 now. BJ, your only bet here is a team we've spent plenty of time talking about. So
yeah, I'll just
lay it on us.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add a few things. Brighton, best price you can find is plus 170 to finish inside the top 6. Again, if you're looking comparatively throughout the rest of it, Brighton finished with the 4th best expected goal differential in the Premier League last season, and they were, miles better under De Zerbi. So to get a price like that on a team that was, essentially the fourth best team in the Premier League by underlying metrics. And Anthony hit the nail on the head. It's like, the thing about it is, Michael, is that, Brighton's obviously incredible with their recruitment and their transfer market activity and everything. What happened towards the end of last season, and this is why I think maybe a loss of Caicedo isn't catastrophic for them. It's obviously a huge loss. There's no doubt about that. But Billy Gilmore was so good in the number 6 role for them that basically De Zerbi just left him there. He was just like, I can't take him off the field. He's playing too well. So Caicedo had to play right back because, he wanted both of them on the pitch at the same time. Now, who knows if Caicedo stays? Like, Brighton's, he signed a new contract with them last year. So Brighton has no incentive to move him. Like, he's not like Kane, who's on essentially going to be out of a contract next year. They can wait and force one of these teams to pay $100 million for them. And I think Chelsea might end up doing it if after a couple bad results to begin the season, because that's how they operate. But I mean, Anthony, all the underlying metrics for Brighton told you that they were a top 4 team. I mean, they finished 4th in expected goals. Like Anthony mentioned, 2.1 expected goals per 90 under De Zerbi. Like, those are insane numbers. And, there is a possibility where teams kind of just figure out Brighton, right? Like, they figure out like, hey, they're trying to bait us into pressing. But we saw that last season where teams just sat off them. And Brighton for a couple matches there, specifically I remember one against United where, they had a kind of a tough time figuring that out. But as you saw the season go along, I mean, they just were obliterating low blocks again and again and again. And they had, like Anthony mentioned, they have all the attacking talent to be able to do it again this season. So I'm really excited by Brighton again. I think at a price of plus 170 for what was the 4th best team in the Premier League by underlying metrics is too good of a price to pass up. So Brighton top 6 and plus 170 for me.
It should be said, Brighton closed a favorite in the FA Cup semifinal
They did.
against Man United on a neutral field in
did.
late April 22nd. So think about that in the context of now where the prices are on Man United and Brighton. Do you really, like, of course you have to price in that United can go spend more money than Brighton probably can in the next month. But I kind of think United is done. They got their business done early. And look, they've done some good stuff. We should probably mention United because we haven't mentioned them in any bets whatsoever yet. I like Mason Mount. I like Sophie and Amrabat. I'm a fan of Haaland in the long run. Sancho bounce back year. Like, there's all kinds of reasons to be bullish on United, but they are starting from such a lower floor relative to last season that I just really don't know how much better they are. And that's even if they're that much better, they weren't truly a top 4 team last year by any metric, what you looked at. I mean, this is a team that, got a career year from Rashford and still had the 4th longest average shot distance in the league, still conceded the 7th most expected goals. It was like an 8th best team by expected threat. They didn't have a striker for most of the year, so that definitely hurts their numbers. Their Casemiro on-off splits were pretty big, and he's north of 30. So like, there's reasons to say, well, maybe United isn't as good as we thought. And last year they certainly overperformed their metrics. Onana wasn't a great shot stopper. United last season, teams were really bad at shooting against them. And
De Gea won the Golden Glove.
And De Gea somehow won the Golden Glove because they either conceded 0 or 7 in like every game. But like, they just weren't that great defensively last year. And I think that they would need to really get a lot out of Haaland to make that leap. And I don't know that he's at that level yet. Like, I want to see something. Like, he had a great year at Atalanta, but it's still only 9 goals in 20 matches. The sample is small, and projecting him into the Prem at this age, huge move. It is a big step for him, I think.
The one way, like, I would bet a United title future, if you want to, if you're a United fan and you want to bet a title future at Bet365, they have PFA Player of the Year. Just bet Casemiro, because if Casemiro is healthy the whole season and is as good as he was for them when he was healthy, like, and they win the title, or I should say, if United wins the title, it'll probably correlate with Casemiro being very healthy, playing in and out, game in and game out, and being really good. He was that important for them, I would think.
Yeah, I just don't have any bets on them. Like I think that they're priced close to their ceiling. Like I
they're
really
a
don't.
team
What
that
is their
I will.
ceiling? Can they do better than third? Really, realistically,
I have no interest in them in a season long way, but I would bet. I think that they're going to be a good underdog against these other teams in this mix. That is how I would play them.
Yeah,
And I think that they're also the team that I would like
agree
to
with
take
that.
on with teams like Palace and Brentford, etc. Like that's United to me.
And United out of possession versus United in possession was a big difference last year. The most interesting thing is Holland and then Onana. Just like how much better are they in build up because they have a goalie who can use his feet. That will be interesting. But like I said, Amrabat, Casemiro, Bruno. They don't even need.
And
a
we
ton
obviously
of
love
shots.
Amrabat for the
Morocco stuff. Yeah, they don't even need and Fiorentina, even though ended in a heartbreak. What I guess the question is, if United hits their ceiling, they're probably third. I would imagine next year would be the year that you could actually make a case for the title charge because Antony gets another year. He actually, I think I was a little too harsh on him last year. 0.47 XG plus XA, first season at 22 in the Prem, like pretty good. A lot of bad shots, but also did get better shots as the year went on. And then Sancho, they get a lot of shots from midfield. So they don't need like a shot monster. They just need a guy who can get some shots in the good areas of the penalty area. They weren't getting anything last year from Weghorst or Martial, and it's not Rashford's natural position. So yeah, I'm not really sure what to make of United. I'm probably not fading them in a sense, like like BJ does every week, but I also just like don't want to lay juice on them top four because I think that the gap is so small.
Yeah, I mean, along that point, I mean, Rashford scored 17 goals last season. Martial, Sancho, and Antony combined for just 16 goals. So that, I mean, this is something we've been talking about for quite a while, is that, and something Anthony's brought up many times, is that United was too reliant on Marcus Rashford to be their entire offensive production. So they really need someone like Mason Mount or even Højlund to be a goal-scoring threat and not just have everything rely on Rashford to be that. Now, Anthony brought up the point about Onana. It does make it very, very interesting for United, with it actually having to be able to build out of the back. The question mark is, do you really think United, with their current offensive pieces that they have, are they going to be elite in build-up play and start breaking down low blocks the way that a team like Arsenal or a team like Liverpool or a team like City would be able to? Probably not. So they would need to be elite defensively to be able to make up for that fact that they aren't elite at being able to break down those low blocks like those other three teams are. And I'm not sure they're really there yet from what we've seen last season. So I agree with Anthony. Like, I'm not going to be, I don't like United. I still don't, but I'm not going to be just railing on them week after week after week, because I think the moves they made this summer addressed all of the problems that they had last season. Like,
no more McTominay.
Right. Like, they needed a goalkeeper that could play this so they could actually build it out of the back, similar to what Ten Hag did at Ajax for so many years. So who better to get than your goalkeeper at Ajax than Onana? And they obviously went out. Mason Mount is a great signing. Like, it gives them more. It is a great buy low on him. Yeah. And it gives, allows them to play double number 10s alongside Fernandes. Højlund's a great signing. I agree with Anthony. Small sample size, obviously a huge number of potential. But if you're bringing in a 20-year-old kid like that to basically be your savior and be your number one striker, like, that's a little premature. So maybe a few years down the road, United will be there on the level of the cities, the Arsenals and Liverpools. But I agree with Anthony. I think their peak is essentially top three. And they're also playing the Champions League again.
Deep Champions League run. I was going to say, I bet you we're all going to be thinking about betting them to win the Champions League. All right, let's go from the top to the bottom. We spent enough time talking about the good teams, so let's do it.
Do we do like 2 minutes on the middle? Or are we gonna? Let's go right to the bottom first.
There's one middle team.
Yeah, I mean, you can't bet a team to finish ninth, Anthony. Unfortunately, this is an actionable podcast. Let's talk about the relegation market, an actual real market. Luton.
What a fun market this is.
This
Holy cow.
This thing is tight. Luton is
crazy.
Is the runaway favorite at minus 300. Then Sheffield United, welcome back, minus 163. Those are the only two odds-on teams. And then Bournemouth plus 200, Burnley plus 275, Forest plus 250, Everton plus 300, Wolves 3-1 as well, Fulham plus 350, Palace plus 650, Brentford 8-1, West Ham 12-1, Villa 40, Brighton 50. Everybody else triple digits. City's 500, only 500-1 to be relegated. They should be about what?
But Michael, what
one
if
point,
sanction?
one
What if
point,
Michael?
1.2
What if?
point, yeah.
What if
Are
all
you-
the sanctions come
Yeah,
down
right.
deducted?
That's what
let's
you're
see,
betting on. Maybe
65 points.
yeah, 1.2 million to 1. That's what I would make
So
City
if
to
you
be
bet
relegated.
if you just bet relegation, and they automatically get relegated because of some dumb like
You should win that bet.
that would
You should win.
the market is
that should
suggesting that
win.
would be a cash.
Might have to ask the great people at Bet365 if that
Yeah.
would be the case.
What are the rules on like FFP auto relegation?
Because I may just throw $1 on that just in case it happens.
Just in case. I don't think it's going to.
Let's focus on these teams here, though. I want to start with the newcomers, specifically Luton and Sheffield United, since they're odds on to go down. We saw last year that the newly promoted sides, I mean, God bless them, they all stayed up.
Yep.
And so, like, when you're betting this market, you have to know that there's always going to be a tax on the newly promoted side. They're always the prices are always going to be a little bit higher. I think that the market is as down on Luton Town as I've seen on a team coming up from the championship since I've been betting on soccer. I honestly can't think of one. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's always the same teams coming back and forth, like Norwich City, etc. So that's one thing to keep in mind. But I kind of like it is at the top. Like, this is another kind of derby style race where there's so many teams that you could see going down that I don't think it makes any sense to lay this kind of price. Like, this is not like a CD situation where you can just feel very good about betting Luton because they're compared to other teams in the Premier League shoestring budget. They play in the backyard of some gardens in England and whatever. It's just not that straightforward because of the environment that they're going to be playing in, which is, quite frankly, that half the league could be relegated, half of it.
Yeah.
And we would be like, that makes a lot of sense. How did we not see it coming that, Palace was going to go down? Roy Hodgson is back. Like, like this, there are so many paths for this to happen. And of course we already know Everton are going down. Like we're going to relegate
that right
Everton.
away.
We're going to relegate
Everton
from match day 1.
They're going to win their first match.
BJ and I are on the same team in a different way. So I'll flip it to you, Anthony, to start. How are you gonna weave your way in this market?
Look, it's really hard because there have been worse teams.
It's a lot harder
to
pick 20, 19th, and 18th than it would be to pick first, second, and third, like in a TriCast this year. I've got no idea.
Yeah, like you mentioned about the tax. Like, the tax is real, and let's flash backwards to last season. It was kind of similar from an odds perspective. I mean, Fulham didn't have the same kind of market respect that Burnley is getting here. And I think Burnley is almost getting a little too much market respect as top promoted team at minus 250, which I think is crazy because Burnley and Sheffield had very similar underlying numbers last year. How they got to those numbers is very different. We could talk about that more later, but Luton plus 0.3 XG difference per 90 in the championship. That's better or pretty comparable to what Nottingham Forest did. In fact, very comparable. Now, they did not spend and go out and buy an entire team worth of players. But I think that gives you a decent baseline of like what this team might look like this year. Just like from an XG difference per 90 perspective, there's going to be some really ugly losses. But I'm certainly not laying minus 310 in a market, minus 300 in a market where they are this big of a, like there's this many teams in the mix. So I think I want to go up the table because I think
traditional, like it would almost make sense if this was the number in a more, I want to say traditional Premier League season, but like kind of the ones we've seen the past 6 or 7 years where you're like, all right, we're picking from five potential teams that are going down. There's legitimately 10 here. That's the reason we're saying that this Luton number's outrageous. I think that it's outrageous to be hanging a team at this high a number before a ball has been kicked in a race with 10 teams in it.
Yeah, and the reason that the Premier League race is so interesting is because that the teams in the early teens have not done shit to get better. And remember, I think the last team that had this low of expectations coming into the season was probably Huddersfield Town.
Yeah.
And they had a negative goal difference in the championship. The XG wasn't all that much better. They snuck up on like a miracle to get up. And the first season in the Prem, they couldn't create anything, but their defense held on enough to the point where they had a minus 0.45 XG difference per 90. They finished 16th. They stayed up by 4 points. And then the next season, it hit them and they finished with 16 points and a minus 0.85 XG difference. So for like one season, I think Luton has a chance. Sheffield is one of the most interesting profiles I've ever seen. They had the 10th most possession in the league last year, yet had more attacking penalty area touches, entries, crosses, and carries than like any team in the league besides maybe Burnley and a couple of the categories. So they never have the ball, but they're very good. They're the most efficient transition team shit ever. I don't think that's even, I don't even know how that's possible. Like I had to double check the numbers on Sheffield when I looked into it, but how they got to where Burnley was pretty comparable. So, Sheffield then sells and die to Marseille, who was their leading goal scorer, 25 goals and assists last year. They bring in a guy, another Adama Traore, has a first name, but his middle name is Adama. So
former Sheriff, FC Sheriff striker.
Yes, the legend who had 12 goals in Sweden last year in 14 games. So that's moderately intriguing. But yeah.
And they've got the psychopath Ollie McBurney.
Yeah, he's
back. He's back in the Prem. So I'm not betting against either of these teams. Just like the market's gone crazy on them. Now let's kind of go up the table. Bournemouth, they're like one of the few in this group that I think the arrow is pointed upward.
Yeah.
We like the new manager. We like the signings. We like the fact that they're investing, new owners, showed real life in the second half. I think they have more attacking upside than most of the teams in this group. Forest is like the biggest black box of all these teams for me because I'm kind of confused on what to expect. But like I said, the reason that I'm intrigued is that I think Fulham, Wolves, Everton, and Palace have done nothing. And it's really concerning.
Excuse me.
Danjuma.
What about Ashley Young, dude?
Yeah.
Has Ashley Young ever been relegated? I don't think so. Yeah. But that's what I'm saying. It sounds crazy to say, but basically every team in this race outside of Luton who should be the favorite should just be minus 110. Like it should just be minus 110, minus 110, minus 110, minus 110, minus 110. I don't see
each individual team is minus 110 to be relegated.
I just don't see I don't see like a difference. If one thing goes wrong for Crystal Palace, they're doomed. If one thing goes wrong for Everton, they're doomed. If it's, you can say the same thing about Wolves. It's Fulham is the team that BJ and I kind of had landed on here, and I like Fulham to finish last at 20-1 because it's not just one thing that could go wrong for this team. I could see a lot going wrong for them.
Yes.
Mitrovic is already in Saudi Arabia.
That's
like
the big one.
He's out, right? Like he said even if that transfer falls through, he still wants to leave. Marco Silva, we've seen this act from him before where he gets his head turned by a team. I mean, it happened from Watford to Everton, right? Like he doesn't really last long at clubs. He's pretty easy to turn his head. They were terrible defensively last year. There's very little depth to the squad, I would say. Like, is it Pauline? I don't know how long their midfielders are going to be out for to start the season.
Yeah.
And this team, I think this team, the bottom could just fall out of it. So that's why I think that rather than just playing the plus 350, I would go for 20-1 to finish last. Because if things go south, I could see Silva just abandoning ship. Don't know where the goals are going to come from if not Mitrovic. The defense, if Mitrovic goes, the defense has to improve to make up for that goal scoring walking out the door. I don't think it will.
Didn't they sign Raul Jimenez?
Yeah.
Sign Raul Jimenez.
So there you go. They're set.
He have a golden boot future
2018
donation.
Raul Jimenez is now walking through that door.
Like,
I mean, I think you could. I mean, you literally could make the argument that Alexander Mitrovic is the most important player in the Premier League last season to his individual team on what they
outside
were
of Yerry Mina.
True.
We need to make a list of an official list at some point this season. Like, who are the actual most important players in the league? Because we've said it about like 15 different people.
Yeah. But like, truly,
Casemiro is on the list.
Like, I went through it. You know, obviously Mitrovic got hurt for a few matches, then he got suspended for 8 or 9 matches towards the end of the season. We're pushing the ref. So he missed 14 matches last season, but the matches that he did play in, he created 15 of Fulham's 35 expected goals. Like, that is an insanely high number for just one player to be able to create, because Fulham's style of play is absolutely centric around what Mitrovic does best, which he is one of the best aerial ball winner strikers in the Premier League. And so, you know, Fulham obviously completed the second most crosses of anybody in the Premier League. So now you're just going to be sending in crosses to, I mean, I don't know how old Raul Jimenez is now. Carlos Vinicius has not been great in his limited sample size as well. So now you're either going to have to change your entire style of play
or sign Weghorst.
Or sign Weghorst or do something. And it's not going to happen. I mean, when Mitrovic wasn't on the pitch, they only averaged 0.88 expected goals per match. Like, that would have been the worst mark in the Premier League by a mile last season. Well, actually pretty close to what Wolves is, and we'll get to them in a second. And then you couple that with the fact that what was the best part of Fulham's defense last season that was honestly horrible? It was the fact that Tim Ream just had like this unbelievable season and was just holding them up like by a thread for the majority of the season. And then he broke his arm towards the end of the season. And obviously, you know, they had already been safe from relegation. So, I mean, Fulham, you know, there's obviously different, you know, expected goals models they can use, but Understat had them conceding 71 expected goals last season. That was like miles the worst in the Premier League. So they went out and got Calvin Bassey from Ajax, who, I mean, he's good. He's a good ball progressor, but like, is he going to be the savior to this defense? Like, no, he's not. So I agree with you, Michael. I think there's a real potential for some extreme bottoming out here from Fulham. There are so many things that can go wrong for this team. They're going to lose with their opening match too to Everton. I hope you know that.
Oh yeah, I'm ready for that one.
Yeah.
So Fulham also with Paulinho, like, he was awesome.
He was.
Yeah.
But he can't be everything to them. Like,
and how long is he out for?
And he's out now. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's out. So like
you're going to play your first 4 or 5 matches. I think it's probably going to the international break without him and Mitrovic. Like,
yeah, it's bad.
It's not,
and it's not like Leno is going to keep saving, you know, at the rate that he was last season. I know he overperformed a great deal because Fulham obviously overperformed both offensively and defensively, but like there's some real warning signs with this team. They obviously re-signed Willian, which, like, he's 34 now. I don't think he's gonna have the same offensive production that he had last season. Like,
what went wrong for them last year?
I mean, nothing really went wrong. Like, everything went right for them. Yeah. They finished 10th. Like,
they finished 10th. Yeah.
And they had the 4th worst expected goal differential. Like that, it's crazy overperformance to get to that level of 10th. Like, it's crazy.
It also gets worse. Red card luck. No team had more red cards against them than Fulham. So they played an extra 2 matches up a man, which they were, you know, plus 3.5 XG in those 2 matches. Penalties. No team, only one team had more penalties awarded, and no team gave away more penalties than Fulham last year, which is pretty crazy. So there's all kinds of shit with Fulham, but they were bottom 5 in rolling XG difference the last 2/3 of the year. When Mitrovic faced that suspension, it only got worse. But like, there's other teams that also have kind of huge holes here that I'm also betting. Like Wolves, 5-1 is still out there to be relegated. How are they scoring?
I don't know.
I don't know either. Moutinho is gone. He was kind of old, but he was still producing for them.
Neves is gone.
Who
led them in goals.
Third most passes. Neves is crazy. He led them in passes into the penalty area, carries into the penalty area, shots, and goals. And he's gone. Mm-hmm. Their replacement, they lose Collins, who was top 5 in passes in the final third as well, as a defender, young guy. They lose Adama Traore, which like sounds like a joke that we're saying this, but like, he had the most crosses into the penalty area last year of any player on Wolves. And The replacement is Matheus Cunha, 2 goals in 10.790s, 2 XG. Not good. Daniel Podence was their leading non-penalty goal scorer with 6 goals.
And they want to sell him right now too.
And they are not buying. I have heard nobody who they're buying. Who are they
They're
buying?
not buying.
Where's the money?
They're in financial trouble.
And they were one of the 4 awful attacks last year, and it's going to be worse. It is 100% worse. They had awful shot quality last year, and Neves hit a couple bangers. They had some timely moments. He's gone. There's nothing. Palace, they lost Wilf Zaha, who's the most important player in the Premier League, to their team. They might lose Michael Olise. Michael Olise led Palace in penalty area passes, crosses. Him, Zaha and Olise and Eze were the whole team going forward. They lose them all. They have a high defensive floor because their defenders are very good, but they couldn't score for large parts last year. It cost Vieira his job. Do we really think that Roy Hodgson is going to solve any of their problems? So these teams like Palace and like Wolves, who maybe didn't have relegation numbers last year, certainly could this year. Like, there's a lot of risk for those guys, those teams. And we didn't even mention your boy Moyes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like
they are still the only team who has not purchased one player in this transfer market.
They're bizarre. Like it's I almost feel like he's doing it on purpose, because this is what David Moyes likes to do. Is just
he's basically in a fight with their
He's having a moment.
Yeah, their director. Like they're just butting heads back and forth.
But I remember when he had one of his best seasons at Everton, which was like 2006, when they basically didn't bring anybody in. They played the same 11 guys over and over and over again, and they were extremely healthy, obviously, to do that. But I feel like Moyes likes to almost just stack the chips against himself. It makes him feel alive. But this is why, what you're talking about with the league being basically 2 blobs is spot on. All these teams are. It drives me up a wall being an Everton fan, watching what the inactivity in the summer and obviously the financial constraints are playing into it. But it's like it's so easy. It'd be so easy for if things were just in a vacuum, just be like, all Everton needs to do is sign a striker and one more center back, and I think they'd be safe.
Yeah, I do too.
And
it's okay now.
Yeah, but like the same,
Everton's got a good midfield. They're fine.
Yeah, they just
comparatively to all these other teams, Michael.
Yeah, good midfield, good manager.
No, they don't have a good midfield. I think they do have a good midfield. They've got a great goalkeeper, and they've got a good manager, and
they have a good plan. Like, they have a plan. A lot of these other teams don't have
that's what I'm saying. If Wolves was just like, all right, let's just go get Wout Weghorst or something, like
that wouldn't help.
But that prototype is what I'm saying. Just like, go get a poacher, and it's one thing, and that should just be the difference between you and this pack of 8 teams, and all of a sudden you're safely in 14th. These teams are all bizarre to me. I don't know if I've seen a relegation run like this, because we don't. Nobody's talking about Burnley being in trouble. Everyone's just assuming that Vincent Kompany's
Burnley's so interesting to me, because like a great comparison to what Burnley is right now. And like, if you go back, and you read all the tactical stuff that Burnley did in the championship, like people basically called them like the best team that the championship has ever seen, like how beautiful it was. But we just saw that 2 years ago. Like, Fulham
did the same thing.
Numbers
they had the same exact.
They were a high possession dominant team that could just build out of the back and play through and just destroy teams. Mitrovic scored 43 goals in the championship that season. Like, it was insane. But then what happened? Fulham came to the Premier League. They couldn't control possession. So what do? They have to play insanely direct. They overperformed like crazy to finish 10th. And now we're talking about them for relegation. So now Burnley comes in. This is not the Burnley that you've seen the Sean Dyche. If you're somebody who's like, oh yeah, I saw Burnley a couple years ago in the Premier League, they're going to be that low block center team that just, only scores off of corners. Like, that is not at all what they are. I mean, Vincent Kompany has taken a lot of principles of what Pep Guardiola has done at Manchester City and applied them to his Burnley team. But now you're coming up into the Premier League and you're not going to be able to hold 65% possession like they did in the championship. Oh, and they also overperformed their XG by 20 goals offensively. So now you're going to come into this type of situation where now I don't think they're getting relegated, but again, they're in this pack where like Burnley is a team that I'm looking at. I'm saying like, oh, there's some things that can truly go wrong for them. Like if they don't switch their style of play and they're not able to build out of the back and they're not able to play through these pressing giants that they're going to see throughout the Premier League on a week in, week out basis. Talent wise, they have brought in some good guys. And I think that they should be, in that middle tier. Like they probably should finish like 13th or 14th. But I mean, they're not worse than Fulham. They're not worse than Wolves. And that's kind of the conversation that we keep coming back to, is that there's this slog of 10 teams that honestly could get relegated. And one we've kind of talked about, I mean, West Ham, to not buy anybody after getting all the Declan Rice money. And what people don't realize also is that Thomas Souček has been absolutely shit for going on about 2 seasons now. He had a great season a couple years ago, right before the Euros. He scored like 10 goals. He was getting forward a ton. And Declan Rice made up for a lot of how bad he was in the middle of the field. And now they don't really have a replacement for that. Now their midfield's going to suck. Defensively, they have brought in some guys, and they obviously West Ham underperformed last season. But to lose your best player, somebody who is literally everything to you in terms of your ball progression, to winning the ball in the middle of the pitch, and then just having strikers who couldn't score, like that's going to be a massive drop off for West Ham if they don't go out and get somebody. I saw they've been in the market for James Ward-Prowse. Looks like that's not going to happen anymore. I don't see it with West Ham. Like I know you, Anthony and Michael, I think you're both on them at 12-1 to be relegated. I don't think that's a bad price. Like they're getting overvalued way too much in this market of 10 teams when they're really not that much better than a lot of these teams in this slog.
Yeah. I mean, look, West Ham, we talked about this. There are so many teams in this little tier that lost their best player or their second best player or both and made no attempt thus far. It is only, we're recording this August 2nd. The transfer window is open for 29 more days and West Ham does have a lot of money to spend. So things can change, but they need to buy a striker and they need to buy another midfielder or two, because you're right about Souček. Souček works well with Rice because Rice gets on the ball so much. Souček can do some ball winning, some pressing, win some headers, doesn't ever have to pass because he can't really do it. Rice had 233 passes in the final third last year. The next most player on West Ham was 98. He had the most tackles, the most interceptions. He's Ruben Neves to Wolves, but even more important, and they are not replacing him. Paqueta is okay, but he's not going to create many shots. Mikel Antonio is well past his prime now.
Yeah, who's going to score for this team too?
Scamacca might leave.
Yeah, so it's going to be Jared Bowen.
He's going. He's going Inter. He's gone.
Yeah,
Jared Bowen.
Not that
Jared
I think
Bowen's
Scamacca's any good anyway.
There's just not.
So
much
who's scoring goals? Who's passing it to them to score the goals? They were one of the least efficient teams in the league last year, and they, like we said, they had the 7th fewest carries and passes in the final third last year. They had the 3rd lowest possession rate. They had an old team. They were the oldest team in the league. Them and Fulham, by the way, oldest average age in the Premier League last year. They have made no signings. They're in Europe because they won the Conference League. So they're in the Europa League. So what is going on? Do these teams like I said, there's still 29 more days, but like West Ham, Fulham, Palace, Wolves are just having the most bizarre summers I've ever seen for a league that has so much money. Like all these other leagues, there's
Everton too. Like
are broke.
You could throw Everton in there, I think.
I think the conversation, I think Wolves, I think they've spent all their money. Like if you think about the signings they've brought in, I mean, they spent upwards of $200 million to assemble this squad. And now you're getting no production from Cunha. You're getting, Matheus Nunes. They spent $50 million on him.
Yeah, Nunes was
Nathaniel Collins. I mean, they got the money back they got for him, but like, if you look at Semedo and all these guys, like they spent big money to bring these guys over to Wolves, and now they've gotten no production. They do have
seasons behind what Everton. They basically did what Everton did 4 years ago when like they did the Sigurdsson, et cetera stuff.
Yeah,
and I think what's happened is like their owners, I believe they're owned by a Chinese businessman who is incredibly rich, but I think he's just tired of spending money and not seeing any results for it. So now
he just does what Jorge Mendes says to
right.
do.
And Lopetegui, by the way, Lopetegui basically like did a whole interview basically saying like, yeah, we're not going to make any signings. It's a really bad situation. And I'm probably leaving like very, very soon. So
Wolves were old too. So here's what I'm betting. I bet Wolves 5-1. I bet Palace plus 750. I bet West Ham 14-1 to be relegated. I think all three of them are going to fall back into that pack. And I know all three of them, Wolves less so, but all three of them had those underlying numbers that were better than those relegation teams last year. But all three of them have 0.0 attacking quality outside of maybe Jared Bowen and Olise if he stays. Like Palace, if they keep Olise, I think maybe has enough with their defense being good. But if he leaves, they don't have money. It's going to be hard to get somebody to come in to play with Hodgson. It's a very tricky situation. So I'm betting all three of them to be relegated. The Mitrovic stuff and Fulham, now I'm getting scared on them too. Fulham to be bottom. Like I said, I don't want these Burnley, Bournemouth, Forest teams because the price isn't that good when I don't think there's much of a gap there. It's just a blob of teams.
Yep. Yeah, and Bet365 has market, and you'll see these pop up around the betting sphere of a TriCast for relegation. So in other words, just getting all three teams, think of it as like a 3-leg parlay of teams being relegated. You can have some fun. Like you want to set aside $30 and put $10 on three different long shots where you're throwing in
any combination involving Fulham and Wood.
Fulham and Wolves,
I think
you can even
can
say
get
West Ham. I think West Ham too. Like,
or you can even throw Luton in there if you truly believe like Luton's the worst
Right.
team in the Premier League and everything. Like, I mean, I don't think they're. I mean, yes, like talent wise, they're the worst team, but like if you want to throw them in with those two, like you can still get a really good price on this.
Yeah, it's
this is also the product of like all three teams staying up last year, which never happens.
Yeah,
and we haven't really talked about Nottingham Forest and Bournemouth much. We like Bournemouth. Forest we're kind of uncertain about, but like there's also the second year syndrome for some of those teams. Fulham would be the classic example. Fulham is like the Sheffield of a couple of years ago that they had that great first year and they were the worst team in the league. You could see the bearings of that forming already.
All right, yeah. So I've talked myself into Fulham, Luton, and Wolves at 125-1.
There you go.
I think all five. I think they might have to relegate like 6 teams this year. Honestly, there's a lot of teams in the championship.
I would just like Everton. I just want Everton to go bust.
Oh yeah,
So,
I already miss Leicester and Leeds. Like Leicester and Leeds are better than like 6 of these teams.
Yep.
By the way, Leeds and Leicester could finish like 12th this year.
I got to do a shameless promotion. I wrote up an English Championship futures column for the season. So if you're interested in that, go to theactionnetwork.com and read it. But Middlesbrough is winning the league.
What's their odds? 11-1?
11-1.
The Borough.
Michael Carrick.
Get all three Northeast teams back in the and Northwest teams in the Premier League if we can get Sunderland up too.
That'd be great. We need that derby. Them in Newcastle, that derby. That's one of the best derbies out there. We need that back.
All right, Golden Boot time. Nothing else on relegation, right? We've relegated.
Lay it with Erling Haaland.
Luton.
Let's move on.
Let's see. We relegated Luton, Fulham, Wolves, Palace,
West Ham.
and West Ham. So 5 teams we've relegated.
And not even Sheffield, who
who
lost their best player.
And we hate we think Burnley's overrated, but we're not relegating them, even though they're only okay. Hopefully you got all that down. Golden Boot should be a little bit more straightforward. I'm gonna go first because we talked a little bit about him earlier. One of the things we talked about at the end of last season was I can't wait to see what they post Brighton at to win the Premier League. Hopefully we get like triple digits. The market knows that Brighton's a good team.
The gig is up, Michael.
Yeah, the gig is up.
Damn.
And my next thought was we'll see what we can get Evan Ferguson at to win the Golden Boot. Hopefully we'll get a big number. I've seen him as low as 30-1. But there's a 50
Come on, man.
There's a 50-1 out there.
That's insane.
You're betting on
30-1.
That's the most like the gig is up.
Isak
like,
isn't even 30-1.
I know. Oh my gosh.
Everybody just loves him. But he is as high as you can find a 50 on him. I think if you are going to be betting Brighton to like finish top 6, it almost just makes sense to or top 4, it makes sense to bet Ferguson to win the Golden Boot too, because you're going to need a big season out of him. They generate a ton. He scores a ton. He's young. He's only going to get better.
He's Erling Haaland.
Yeah, he's the Irish Haaland.
He is.
He's only going to get better.
Dead seriously. Yeah,
and
I'm being dead serious.
And the way that this market kind of breaks down is similar to the title race, I would say, whereas like you got the odds on favorite. You're going to need something wrong to go wrong for Haaland, right? He's either going to have to start slow, get hurt, whatever.
He's got to get hurt.
And if he does, then the pack is wide open, I think. Like, and Ferguson, Anthony, you said it. Like, I think he's got 20 goal potential. If you can get 22, maybe, like, you're within a shot here as long as Haaland doesn't play half the season.
It'd be nice if Kane would get sold too.
Yeah. And that kind of that now that you mention it, the only other one I have any interest in is Richarlison at 100-1. And I just would bet it now and in case Kane gets sold, and this Ange Postecoglou revolution at Spurs, which I think should drive up their goal scoring numbers quite a bit, leads to Richarlison having a massive season. I think he's going to. He's such a good player, and he was robbed of a season by evil Spurs last year. So,
but he had the moment against Liverpool, Michael.
He did.
He had the moment,
and he was great at the World Cup.
Yep.
And we miss him terribly at Everton. But those would be the only two that I have any interest in. I know BJ could tell us about another one that.
Yeah.
Another guy that I was like, can you just make this? Can they just throw us a bone and make either Ferguson or Ishak 100-1?
I know. I mean, I like Ishak at 40-1. Like I said before, I truly think he's a top 5 striker in the Premier League in terms of talent level. He's got every single finish that, you could imagine as a striker. And, I wrote about him in the summer about how, Newcastle and their style of play leads to so many transitional opportunities, leads to so many great chances for him to score. And he did have so to win this, you're going to have to take a striker that has the potential to essentially go on a run like Haaland did. So there was a period from about March towards close to the end of April where Ishak scored I think it was 8 goals in 7 matches and was just scoring from everywhere. Newcastle was flying offensively. What you need him to do is to be able to have that type of production. And he's obviously not going to peak that for an entire season, but have those little runs throughout the season to try and catch Haaland. I found it interesting, Michael. You want to guess what Haaland's over-under for goals is this season? In the Premier League only.
33.5.
It's 29.5. He had 28.4 expected goals last season. So they know that he did overperform, but also he was like miles.
Yeah,
what?
He's always going to overperform.
He's a great striker. He's great. He's going to overperform. It is what it is. But yeah, it's just hard in this market because Haaland's minus 140 to win the Golden Boot. I don't know if I've ever seen somebody at a minus number to win the Golden Boot in England, especially a league with so many great strikers. But again, for a striker like Ishak, who's playing for a top 4 team, what should be a top 5 or 6 offense in the Premier League, and given the talent that he has, the potential is through the roof. And I think you have to find somebody in this lower tier that has that ceiling of somebody like a Ferguson, somebody like an Ishak who has that ceiling to be able to potentially catch Haaland if something goes wrong with him. So Ishak at 40-1 is my only Golden Boot future. Also, Michael, to add on to that, you can go read at theactionnetwork.com. I wrote up a little thing about Evan Ferguson going into the season. Bet365 has his over-under for goals at 15.5 at even money. I've already bet him over 15, or excuse me, it's over 15 goals, so 14.5. So over 15 goals this season. I think that's a dangerously low number for somebody like you mentioned has the crazy ceiling at only 18 years old, playing for one top 4 offense in the Premier League. So, and I also bet Ishak over 25 goals at 14-1, just in case Haaland decides to score 40 goals.
Yeah, you pretty much only have a chance in the Golden Boot market, I think, if Haaland's out for an extended period of time. Like he misses like 10 matches. Isak would be the name for me too if I had to bet it. He did have 10 goals in 17 90s. So if you scaled it up because he came in late, kind of was hurt. If he played 30 90s, 35, could he get to 20-25? Salah on the way down. Kane maybe gets sold. Darwizzi is interesting. Darwin Nunez.
Yeah, he's too short.
Is he going to play
Too
though?
short though. That's the
Yeah,
thing too.
that's just
Like, is
too
he playing
short.
main
Gakpo
striker with
started over him
Gakpo?
with it. Yeah,
He's not
it's
going to
like-
take pens. Like,
He's
but
too
he was
short.
putting up like 6 shots per 90 last
Who
year.
it was? I think it was Jota. We all liked Jota last year.
He
Jota
got
was
hurt.
at what? But he was
He
at
got
like
hurt the day after we
He was
recorded.
33-1.
He was 33. Right. So like Nunez is half that number. So
Well, Nunez is better than Jota.
yeah, I know, but I'm saying
he
like,
is,
if
but,
we
like,
were walking
yeah.
into like that situation, I think we could all talk about like even 25 or 30.
I mean,
what's
Darwin's the kind of guy that if he did have that go year, like
Yeah.
I do think he will have a 25 goal season. Like he's just that talented. But yeah, like you said, 16-1 when Ishak is more than double is just crazy.
Yeah, what you need is a really talented striker on a top 4 or 5 offense. Like none of these teams, like nobody on Aston Villa, no Ollie Watkins is not going to contend for it. So you need one of these to Brighton's, Liverpool's, Arsenal's. I think there's goal scorings too spread out with Arsenal to actually take anybody from them, as you saw last
If
season.
Saka was on pens,
He
Yeah.
is.
But
that's interesting to me because he's 21. And then he took the lead.
He's been on
last
pens
year.
for them for a long time.
Odegaard
Right.
scored 15 goals for them last year. Like they spread it out too much.
Martinelli scored, I think.
But they
14,
do
like,
until they don't, though.
What do you mean? Like
Jesus is already out.
Yeah, but then they also brought in. They also
wasn't
brought
he
in.
out? Wasn't he out last year? He was on
Nikita.
crutches. He was on
I'm
crutches
telling
the
you.
whole
Yeah,
last
well, he
year.
missed the second half of the season.
Yeah,
Nikita is every bit as good.
Nketiah is so mid, man.
No, he's not.
He's so mid. He's so mid that they're
No,
like
he's
bringing in
not.
Balogun. They might keep him
And
around.
Balogun's not going to play, but like, no. I mean, Nikita had great goal scoring production when Jesus was out. There wasn't this massive drop off when he was like. People forget, like Jesus was there for the end of the season when Arsenal was just getting ripped apart defensively, and he really, he had good XG number, but like,
nah, Jesus is the man. But
he's great. I'm not saying he's bad, but I'm also saying like Nikita's up there with the level with him, so I don't think there's going to be this big drop off. And also, you're bringing in Kai Havertz as well, so like there's so many players in this Arsenal team that have the goals. So I don't think you can take really anybody on those. And same thing with Liverpool. It's like the goal scoring is so spread out with them that I don't really see taking anybody from them. Like, so it's just like, I mean,
and you know what's sick is if you bet
but
if Haaland gets hurt, it's just going to be Julian Alvarez anyways.
Maybe and his odds are short too.
I know.
I can't remember what he is.
Basically, what we're saying is the hold on the golden boot market is really big, and it's kind
if you're gonna take Alvarez, he's 9-1 to be City's top goal scorer. Like, you want to guess what Erling Haaland is to be City's top goal scorer this season?
minus
same price
600,
minus 2,000. So, yeah. So like he basically has to get hurt for him not to win that.
Yeah.
So if he does, like,
and hurt, like not hurt, injured,
like tearing an ACL injury.
Yeah,
is what I'm talking about. So,
right. All right. So, let's wrap this thing up. Before we do, we'll note that we'll be back on our regular scheduled programming ahead of week 1, which means that you'll hear from us Thursday morning previewing the upcoming weekend's matches. That will be August the 10th, I believe. Because the season starts on the 11th with Vincent Kompany versus Pep Guardiola on a Friday afternoon kickoff. The infamous Friday afternoon kickoff where usually Arsenal plays and either loses to Brentford or gets really lucky in a win against Palace. But this year it'll be City and Burnley. We'll also have our second annual over-under draft with our buddy Alon Shapiro from the FML FPL podcast. That'll come out early next week. Anthony and BJ will break down the rest of the European leagues and pick out their favorite bets there. We should have just did a relegation odds bet draft because it was like, let me just ask you real quick. I don't want you to go over 10 seconds explaining it. If you had the first pick in a relegation odds draft, who would you pick, Anthony?
Do I have to bet it?
Yeah.
Wolves.
I'll take Fulham.
I probably would have taken Wolves or West Ham. So I'll say West Ham.
We should also mention, Michael, that me and Anthony will be also on Friday. We'll be recording a Women's World Cup round of 16 podcast. So if you're still
so busy,
over
here.
busy time. Yep, that'll be coming out on Friday, which
Cool.
is actually an interesting round of 16.
All right, so let's wrap up. Any other bets that we have? We'll be quick with these. We've already gone pretty long, and we apologize to our producers for that. BJ, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I feel like one team we haven't talked about yet is Bournemouth. And it's a team that I think we're all kind of buying, from what they have done in terms of changing their manager. They brought in Adane Iola from Rayo Vallecano, which I
Former
think
NYCFC legend.
exactly, who I think incredibly raises the ceiling of what Bournemouth can be this season. Now, there's no data points out there that I can tell you that Bournemouth, by expected goals or any type of metric, that they are going to be a top 10 type team. But from the slog that we've talked about of any of the teams that have all these problems, like Bournemouth, if we remember last season, going into last season, they were kind of in this Luton Town mold where I think their point total was 32.5 going into the season.
Mm-hmm.
They made no investments in their squad and they kind of just rolled with what they had in the championship. And then, Scott Parker, gets beat 9-0 by Liverpool. He gets sacked. They bring in Gary O'Neill and, he kind of took them to the peak of what they could be. And they made a lot of investments in the January transfer window because they had the change in ownership. They had money. They brought in a lot of young talent, Hamad Traore, Ouattara, Zabrani, who's a very promising center back who didn't really feature last season. I mean, this is a, Ukrainian center back who started at the age of 18 for Ukraine in the Euros in 2021. And Iola is going to immediately change what Bournemouth was, because obviously Bournemouth was this passive team that was just trying to play in transition. He plays a very, very unique style. Think of, one of his in a lot of these managers, one of his favorite managers or his idols is Marcelo Bielsa. So he plays this intense pressing style at Vallecano and moves them up into the top half of the table last season. I mean, they finished last season with the second most high turnovers to Bilbao, the third best passes per defensive action. And another key aspect of him is once they win the ball, he wants these quick transitions to catch teams out of position. So they had the most shots in La Liga off of forced high turnovers. That is the perfect blend of what Bournemouth is trying to become. Because if you remember at the end of last season, we kept betting Bournemouth to score because they were so dangerous in transition with all these new pieces in their squad. And they actually, for a period from about January, and they obviously, once they were safe from relegation, they kind of fell off. But they finished from a good 3 or 4 month period as a top 10 team in expected goals for. So the ceiling for Bournemouth, they've made investments in their squad. They've brought in a ton of young talent. And I think they're a team, if you're going to pick out, there's a clear top 9 in the Premier League. It's who's going to finish in that 10th spot? We love Brentford, but they're going to be without Ivan Toney for about half of the season. So if you're going to take a shot on one of these teams, I think Bournemouth has absolutely the most upside to finish in the top 10. So I like them at 9-1 to finish in the top 10. Again, this is the team that had the worst expected goal differential in the Premier League last season. So I can't give you really any awesome data point that tells you this, but given the manager change, it really raises the ceiling of what Bournemouth can be. So I think there's going to be some good times in the South Coast this season. And I think there's a decent shot that of all these teams that Bournemouth has the best shot at the price to finish inside the top 10. And I'll just do one more. Most assists, Bruno Fernandes. You can find him at 12-1 out there. He led the Premier League with 17.4 expected assists last season, but only had 8 assists because of some poor finishing from United. So now you bring in all these, you bring in Højlund. Hopefully, obviously these other offensive options like Antony have better seasons. Price of 12-1, I think is too good for a guy who literally created the most assists last season. So those are my other 2 bets. And then TriCast. These are always fun, but Arsenal, City, Newcastle, but I've already talked about them. 150-1. I think it's a decent price for that, how the Premier League should finish.
Bournemouth is a team that I think will probably pull 2, maybe 3 big upsets for.
They did. They beat Liverpool and they
season.
beat Tottenham last season.
Yeah,
they did pull off a couple big upsets, and they can do it again this season.
Yeah, they're
gonna Wolves as well. It was a notable one. It was. They were 5-1. Crazy thinking about it now.
I know. Anthony, you want to just run through your list of bets here?
Yeah, there's a lot of matchup stuff, and I think that this year is probably the most fun year you'll ever have to play matchups because of the blobs. because the relegation market.
That should be the title of this episode, by the way.
The
The year of
blobs.
the blobs.
Year of the blobs. So like Arsenal over United is minus 130. I think Arsenal has a much higher floor than United and a much higher ceiling than United. I think that they were much, much better last year, like almost a half goal per game in XG underlying numbers. Brighton minus 155 against Villa. We'll get into Villa more in that point total draft. I don't want to go too deep into everything right now because we've kind of run long here. And then, Brentford, man. So like they're priced at the bot, like in the blob. And I just don't think they're in the blob. I don't think that like of those teams in that upper 10 to 15 range, Brentford loses Tony, but Brentford was also like not in that range last year. They were 8th or 7th. They lose Tony. Okay, maybe now their ceiling is lower, but plus 140 to finish above West Ham, minus 120 to finish above Fulham and Wolves. I'm sorry, I'm going to be betting that again with Brentford matchups. I think those are some great looks, and you can also find a bunch of plus money tickets if you like Bournemouth enough and think that maybe 9-1 top half might be a little too far. There are a lot of plus money matchups where you can bet this Bournemouth team. I agree with everything BJ said about Areola from Vallecano. I mean, they were our favorite team in Spain last year, one of our favorite teams in the last 2 years. There is a bunch of plus money prices out there on Bournemouth to finish above some of these teams like Fulham, Wolves, West Ham, who we think have done jack to get better. So that's where I'm looking. I will be playing a bunch of matchups this year because I think that it's just the most fun way to get into it. Last year, Arsenal United was plus money and Palace Wolves was plus money. Now we're, a little bit juicier on some of these, but Brentford to finish above some of their compatriots is a great bet. I think Arsenal over United as well. Brighton and Villa. I think Villa has some regression coming, even though I like what Emery's done.
I'll throw a TriCast in there as well. City, Newcastle, Spurs at 200-1. Like I said, I think Newcastle just has like this of these teams in that top blob is the one outside of City, of course, that just feels the steadiest. And I really think Tottenham, Anthony's this could be Tottenham's year. This is the league is set up for a team like them to not or to gate crash. So give me the Spurs. Give me Anthony Spurs to have a big year. So that TriCast, City, Newcastle, and Spurs at 200-1. I mentioned that relegation one. And should we bet Mudryk most assists at 50-1?
No.
No.
That's not good enough. Also, there's just so many better players.
They're hard, but they're just not. They just don't have the hair. They didn't have the hype.
He's going to be a very interesting player to see how he fits within, Chelsea. Like, does he actually peak at that left wing role? Like, is, Nicholas Jackson going to peak? Like, there's a lot of, I think there's way more question marks with Chelsea than the market is, and then people are making out to be right now.
Question marks can be good.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. And
but they can also cause you to completely fall off.
They could also be bad.
They can also be really bad. Like maybe only having one midfielder might be a bad strategy.
They do need another one of those. Mauricio Pochettino is magic as far as I'm concerned.
But what happens? Because here's the thing with Chelsea. What happens if Enzo Fernandez gets hurt? They have literally nothing else to play in the middle of the pitch, which is the most important place to be on a soccer field.
I'd argue strikers more important these days, but
all right, you guys can have that. You guys can have that conversation. You guys can have that conversation in your text messages. While we try to wrap this thing up. Once again, we'll be back plenty over the next few days. Women's World Cup, point total draft, go through the other leagues in Europe, and then of course looking at match day 1 in the Premier League. Starts on August 11th with City and Burnley. We'll have our normal, match by match breakdowns, favorite bets, underdog parlay. The whole kit and caboodle is back. Wondergoal is back. Anthony is back. BJ's back betting on Arsenal to win the league at basically
what could go wrong?
Minus 110.
Yeah, it's a disastrous number. So thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking with us this entire marathon episode. Thank you to our producers and our video folks. I'm Michael Leboff. That's Anthony DeBundo, BJ Cunningham. This has been Wondergoal presented to you by Bet365.